BrainSell, and I just want to say that we're so glad that you could join us today. We're going to be showing you and telling you all about Sage Fixed Assets and how it can completely change your business for the better. I want to kick things off by welcoming you all because you're in for a real treat. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're just going to start off first with a few quick housekeeping items. The first is we're going to be doing a 45-minute presentation for you. We will be having Q&A at the end. Please type your questions into the question box to submit them throughout the presentation. Don't be shy, just whenever they come to you, just stick them in the questions box. And then, of course, at the end of the presentation, we will send a copy of not only our slide deck, but the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email that you will get probably tomorrow. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Wayne Austin, our esteemed Sage Fixed Assets guru. Wayne comes from a very well-rounded background, covering everything from owning his own business to development to sales, and now as a sales engineer. Wayne also served in our Air Force for a number of years. So Wayne, thank you so much for being with us today. Really looking forward to learning more about fixed assets, how it can add value to our customers and make their lives a lot easier.
Thank you, Kelly. And thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about all things fixed assets. In other words, how to manage your fixed assets through their complete life cycle using the Sage Fixed Asset solution. So first, I'm going to give you an overview of all of the various components of the solution. We'll also talk about how you can effectively manage remote assets, since in the current environment, more companies than ever have assets that might be stationed with remote employees, or you may have multiple sites and simply want to be able to keep better track of where those fixed assets are. We'll also talk a bit about the financial impact of ghost as well as zombie assets and the changes in the CARES Act that impact qualified improvement property. So if your organization does have qualified improvement property, we'll talk about how you can take advantage of those changes. We'll also talk about integration between the Sage Fixed Asset solutions and Sage ERP systems. And in today's webinar, we're really going to focus on the Sage 100 product, Sage 300, as well as Sage Intacct. I'll also actually go into the solution so you can see live how the solution operates and how that may fit in your environment. And at the end, we'll leave some time so that we can answer any questions that you have throughout the webinar. Now, as Kelly mentioned, feel free, as I'm going through things, if you do have questions about anything at all, go ahead and type it in the chat, and we will actually take a look in the chat during the Q&A session to make sure we cover anything that may have been asked throughout the presentation. So let's take a look at, what is the value of using Sage Fixed Assets? How's that going to impact your business? The solution is going to help you maintain compliance with IRS tax laws, GAAP rules. It integrates with Sage ERP systems as well as non-Sage systems. Now, if you're using a non-Sage ERP, that would require some customization, but certainly reach out to Kelly's team and we can get you some more information on that. But I will cover today integrating with 100, 300, and Intacct. The solution is also going to help ensure that you have clean and accurate data, and of course, accurate data in, accurate data out. So, the benefits of that. It's going to help you eliminate overpayments of taxes and insurance and give you the opportunity, of course, to maximize any tax advantage based on tax rule changes, since we do keep up to date on all of the federal tax rule changes. As we know, time is not free, so anything that saves you time, therefore saves you money. So we'll talk about some of the efficiencies that the solution will bring. It also gives you the ability to really incorporate the fact that you can actually attach images, invoices, and the solution and the asset details. That is actually pretty helpful on the disaster recovery side of things, So if you do have to file an insurance claim, one of your sites gets damaged or destroyed, and you have all of the digital proof, what you had where, that's actually pretty helpful during that process. You'll also have ease of communication with external accounting firms or auditors because of the robust reporting capabilities within the solution, which I'll actually show you some of the primary reports you would need once I go into the solution. Now, for those of you that may undergo some type of audit where you're required to have Sarbanes-Oxley compliant reports, those are also built in as well. So, for example, if you need to see who changed what values and what assets, things like that, those types of reports are also available. Let's look overall at a fixed asset life cycle. So let's talk a bit about the acquisition phase. So this would be before it becomes a fixed asset. You're purchasing some equipment, furniture and fixtures, whatever the case may be. If it's not part of a project, it may be going directly in service where it needs to go through the depreciation cycle, where you're going to calculate depreciation for tax, for GAAP, state, AMT, whatever scenarios you may need. But on some environments, you may have assets you're purchasing that may need to go through some type of CIP phase where you're going to have various accumulated costs rolling up into that before it's placed in service. So that would be the acquisition phase for those of you that may have CIP before they become fixed assets. Throughout the depreciation phase, you need to be able to handle depreciation calculations for all your books. You certainly are also going to need to be able to handle transactions such as transfers or disposals and so on throughout that depreciation process. The next phase, which not everyone does, I realize, but doing physical inventories of your fixed assets. That's a good way to ensure that you actually have what you have, where they are. You can, leverage using barcode labels and completing those physical inventories, be it semi-annually, annually, or biannually, as some people do. So that would be your third phase. The reporting cycle is you need to be able to report on all of this, be it in the depreciation phase, the acquisition phase, or inventory phase. You need some robust reporting either built into those components or the ability to create custom ad hoc reports as needed to ensure you can report on the entire process. And of course, once those assets have reached their end of life, now you need to be able to do a disposals and capture any gain loss calculations, net proceeds, and so on, and be able to report on that. So those are really the 5 phases of the assets life cycle, and certainly depending on your particular business, you may be simply dealing with depreciation, inventory, disposals, and reporting, but if you certainly have ongoing or recurring projects, you will have an acquisition phase that may involve CIP. So let's take a look at which portions of the Sage Fixed Asset Solutions handle which of those cycles. The planning module would be what's going to handle things outside of your ERP. So as you do a PO or invoice of some sort in Sage 100 or 300, for example, if that asset is going to be placed directly in service, it would go straight to the depreciation side. If it's part of a project or CIP, it would go in the planning module where you will be able to report on all of the roll-up costs tied to that for materials, labor, and so on, report on your spend against budget. And if you notice on the graphic on the right, you can actually see the actual spend against both an original and a revised budget. And to the top portion of that graphic, you can see what's spent or unspent of the budget. The planning module in itself has pretty robust reporting, so you can add all of those various transactions and the roll-up cost against the individual line item, which then can be placed in the service at whatever the total spend is on that item. This will send assets directly to the depreciation module to be placed in service so that you don't have to do dual entry. You simply enter it in the planning module as part of a project, place it in service when it's ready to be placed in service, and it'll be able to start depreciating in the depreciation module. So let's talk about the depreciation module. The depreciation module has more than 50 methods built in. So right now, I believe it's 52 depreciation methods built in. It is kept up to date. We update our tax rules each year. That's typically done in January. And we also do feature enhancements, and that's typically done mid-year. It does include pretty robust reporting, as I mentioned, so you can generate an actual fileable 4562. The attachment that goes along with that with all of the details. You can also generate things like a sale of property report or a Form 4797 worksheet, which will include all of your sales, where you can see everything broken down by the correct section property, so your 1245, 1250 property and so on, and all of the details on your ordinary gain losses for the feds. So that is another great report. It does also include tax expense report, which you would use to reconcile that 4562. Now, it also includes an audit advisor. An audit advisor you can actually run at various points throughout the year just to see what's going on with assets in the company. And this will actually create an exception if there's any issue that's a potential red flag for you to get audited. And I'll actually show you how that works when we go into the solutions. But there are many standard reports out of the box that should meet all of your reporting needs. And you also, of course, have the ability to customize those standard reports. The tracking module. This would be used for doing physical inventory of your fixed assets. So where you can actually barcode those assets, be able to scan them using either an Android app or traditional scanner so that you can verify that you actually have what you're supposed to have and where they are. You can capture details about where they are specifically, site number, or one of your branches or divisions. You can also certainly capture things like who assets are assigned to. Now, while someone is actually conducting a physical inventory, they will be able to update any of this information as part of that process. And we'll talk about that a bit more as well. Now, I mentioned that there were many standard reports built into the solutions. Those reports can also be customized in the solution. What the custom reporting feature does, it gives you an integrated version of SAP Crystal reports where you can build any type of ad hoc report that you may choose. It has access to every field in the database for any module, so you can literally pull information from any of these data sources and create something truly ad hoc. So essentially, this gives you unlimited reporting capabilities. Now, you also can export a standard report out to Crystal report format, further customize it as well. So let's talk a bit about ghost assets. So this really ties back to doing physical inventories. And this is where you'd want to confirm that you actually have what you have where they're supposed to be. So ghost assets are assets that you're carrying on the registry. They're not in service. They've been either lost or stolen or somehow rendered unusable and simply may have not been communicated to the accounting department. So what that means for you is that you're continuing to pay taxes and insurance premiums on these assets, and you certainly are not going to be budgeting for replacing them since you actually think they are in service. So this also impacts productivity. That's also going to impact your budgeting process because, as I mentioned, you simply don't know they're not there, and you're not going to be budgeting to replace them, especially if these are business critical assets. The other side of this, of course, would be zombie assets that somehow departments are acquiring assets that you are not aware of, so you don't have them on the registry. And that can also create some financial impact for you because certainly you're not going to be insuring them because you don't know you have them. And that may result in fines or penalties if you're underreporting your fixed assets. So both sides can actually have a negative impact. Let's talk a bit about remote employees or even remote assets in general and some of the information you'll want to capture and how you'll want to capture that. So if you take a look at the screenshot of an asset detail in the depreciation module, so at the top half are all of the general information fields. All of those are customizable. And this is where you can capture details such as who an asset's assigned to, what physical location is that, what department, the appropriate jail account, and so on. If you have vehicles, you may leverage using this for capturing things like VIN numbers. Same would be true if you have IT assets. You can capture things such as serial numbers. And of course, the book fields down below are what's going to be used for handling your depreciation calculations. But what's different in today's world is the fact that now you have far more remote assets than you probably would ordinarily do if you're equipping someone, for example, with a home office. The tracking module. This is a screenshot from in the tracking module where if you notice here, I have the same general information fields, but however, in the tracking module, there's no access to the book fields. So if you have site managers or someone in IT or whoever that may be responsible for handling physical inventories, they have no access to the book fields and cannot accidentally do anything to impact depreciation. But however, they can update any of those general information fields, such as where the asset is, who it's assigned to, updating serial number information, and so on. They can update these fields while actually doing a physical inventory as well, so not just in the software. So if, for example, you're doing a physical inventory of multiple locations, they can actually update this information while they're conducting that physical inventory. If you want to keep track on who IT assets, for example, are assigned to, you can easily use a field for that. And I would actually recommend making that one of the fields that's shared with both the depreciation module and the tracking module. All 28 fields in the depreciation module are available to the tracking module, but the tracking module has an additional 12 fields where you can capture information that may be, not pertinent or relevant as far as location and things like that. Now, if I'm using a field for identifying who assets are assigned to, in this case, you can see for assets assigned to Jennifer Clark, I can easily generate a report showing all of the assets assigned to that person. If that person is leaving the company, I can easily export this report, send it off to HR, and say that this user has, a laptop, 2 monitors, whatever the case may be, and easily identify that information. I can also use this if I'm keeping track of various job sites or remote sites where I have assets on a temporary basis, and I can search based on this and easily identify assets at a particular location. You can search based on any of those general information fields that I previously showed, and you can also create groups or filters based on any of that information. Now let's talk a bit about integration, and today we're going to be focused on looking at integration with Sage 100, Sage 300, and Sage Intacct. So this is a screenshot looking at integration setup in Sage 100. Now in both Sage 100 and 300, you can actually create a visual workflow like I have displayed here, where you can quickly launch directly to an AP transaction or a PO transaction. And while doing that transaction, I can actually tell it to create fixed assets. Now, you can also launch the fixed asset module if you create a shortcut for that here as well. Now, I'm quite sure Kelly's team at BrainSell can be helpful with getting the integration set up if you have not currently set that up. Now, let's take a look at accounts payable transaction here. So if you'll notice on the graphic on the right, if you look in the lower right side, you'll see on the description, there's an asset template. Those are going to be any templates that you create in the depreciation module will sync with both Sage 100 and Sage 300, since both of those particular ERP systems have a two-way integration with the fixed asset module. I'll talk about Intacct a little bit after this. Now, as far as getting the journal entry into Sage 100, Sage 100, as soon as you run depreciation in the fixed asset module, that information is available to Sage 100. Sage 100 will actually pull the GL information from the Sage fixed asset solution. In the case of Sage 300, that information will be pushed out from the fixed asset module. As you can see here, my journal entry information that is being pulled from the Sage Fixed Asset solution by Sage 100. Now, in this graphic, you're seeing what it looks like for the process of pushing out the journal entry to Sage 300. So it actually creates this dialog box. If you have multiple companies, you can choose which company you want to send information out for to Sage 300. And you will simply select your posting date and your journal entry date. And if you need a reference number, then you would simply select preview and post, and it will send that information out to Sage 300. For Intact, it is currently one-way integration. So in other words, it will send the journal entry outbound, but Intact does not yet have the ability to create assets in the fixed asset module. I know that development is actually from both sides are looking at that, so I expect that to come at some point in the future. But for now, for Sage Intact, from inside of Sage 100, you simply launch the link, and once you've configured the dimension mapping as displayed on the right for whatever dimensions you're using in your setup of Sage Intact, it will save those settings. So in the future, all you would simply do is launch the link for the GL posting the Intact, populate your posting period and a reference number, preview and post, and it'll simply send that information out. Now let's talk a bit about the CARES Act changes. So those of you that have any qualified improvement property that may be impacted by the changes in the CARES Act, our solution already supports this. We were anticipating this since technically this is really a technical correction that should have been included in the TCJA a couple of years ago, but they finally made the change now, so we already supported this. Under the old rules, those qualified improvement properties had to take a GDS life of 39 years, 40 years for ADS. They were Section 179 eligible, but they were not bonus eligible. Under the new rules, they can now be depreciated over 15 years for GDS and 20 for ADS. They are Section 179 eligible still, but however, they are now bonus eligible. So you can simply do them at 15 years. You can do 100% bonus, or you can simply do it at straight line half-year convention for no bonus. Now, there's some additional information available on this. So those of you that are currently going out to Sage City for the current product you have, if you go out to Sage City and search under the fixed assets area, you can actually find these articles that were published by one of my colleagues, one of the design analysts who's also a CPA, posted these great articles that have some really good details about those CARES Act changes. So let's take a few moments and jump into the solution so we can see some of what we were just talking about. So I'm going to start off in the depreciation module because I do want to make sure I hit on some of the important areas that we just discussed, such as how to capture some of the information that you might need as far as identifying who has what. I'm going to go into an asset details here, and these are the general information fields that I talked about. All of these fields are customizable. Okay. If you go into field customizations, I simply rename that field to assign to. I can rename any of the fields, such as my custom field 7 here, for example. I've renamed that building number, and that's what's actually displayed here. So whatever type of assets you have, whatever level of details you want to capture, you're actually able to do that. Now, for those of you that might be doing physical inventories, that asset ID field is the field where you would capture the asset ID number, and it will take up to 50 characters, anything alphanumeric. So if you are going down the path where you're going to generate barcodes, assign those tags to your various assets for doing physical inventory, that is the information that would be populated here. So when someone is doing that inventory, scans that barcode, That's how you identify it's looking at this particular asset. Now, as I mentioned, you can actually attach images, invoices, receipts, which is actually pretty helpful in a disaster recovery type situation, or even for audit purposes. And you can even link a single image or invoice to multiple assets, no problem in the system. So if you order, multiple computers or whatever the case may be on a single invoice, you can link that single PDF to all of those assets, no problem. And it will take a nice variety of file types, by the way. Basically, if you can scan it or take a picture of it, you can attach it. PDFs, JPEGs, bitmap, and so on. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, you can search based on any of these fields. So if you do want to search for assets assigned to a particular person, for example, I can simply choose that field. All the fields are searchable. Okay. And you have a variety of operators you can use. If you're not sure, you can just use contains. But let's say I'm going to be specific here, and I want to find all of the assets assigned to this particular person. There are all of the assets tied to that person. Now, the audit advisor that I mentioned, I'm going to run that in a moment, but just reminder that this is very rules driven, right? So as we update our tax rules, whatever tax rule changes are included are going to be what's enforced in the asset details. So, for example, the rules surrounding bonus, the correct estimated life, and so on. If you go to Help and select What's New, it's going to show you what changes are included in the current release. If I click on Learn More, I can see all of the current tax rule change in the version that I'm using. So in my case here, all of the changes from the Further Consolidated Appropriations Act are included here. You can see all of the tax extenders tied to that. But for example, there's also changes to Section 179 for fiscal 2020. So I can easily select that, and you'll see here that the Section 179 limit has been increased by 20,000. It was $1,020,000 for 2019. For fiscal 2020, it's $1,040,000. So all of this information is here as a quick reference that you can certainly take advantage of, saves you having to go out to the IRS website. So with that being said, when I run the audit advisor, it is going to be looking at things based on the current and effective tax rules that were in place during the time frame, the fiscal year that I'm looking at. So if I run this, for example, I'm going to run this back to the past where I know I do have some issue for my fiscal 2018. And so based on the rules in place at that time, it's going to identify anything that is a potential red flag for me to get audited. So you can see here regarding makers, I've got an exception generated. Regarding Section 179, I've got another exception generated, and everything else looks pretty clean. So let's take a closer look at this issue surrounding Section 179. It's going to tell you what it sees as the issue. So in this case, it's saying that I'm exceeding the limit for that fiscal, which was $1 million, and it's going to identify a resolution. And in this case, it is telling me that I need to reduce my total 179 by more than $5 million. So if I'm exceeding the 179 expense for that fiscal by $5 million plus, I'm probably definitely going to get audited. It is also going to generate a group where anything that's triggering that exception will show up in that group, which makes it easy for me to find and correct. So I can simply now go to my list view, and you'll see the two groups created for the two issues. Let's take a look at the 179 related issue. If you look in this asset detail, you'll see for this particular asset, I'm taking a 179 deduction of $675,000, and the rest of them, I'm taking $700,000. So individually, I'm below the $1 million limit, but however, combined, I'm well over the limit. So I can simply reduce them to be in compliance for what was in place for that fiscal. And I can now come in here and delete those auto-created groups. I can rerun that audit advisor, and if it comes back up clean, then I'm good to go. So it's a nice, helpful tool. Oh, you also, by the way, do have the ability to make changes to your bonus percentage on the fly, and also make mass changes in the case of the CARES Act that I mentioned. So let's take a look at the 168 switch. If, for example, you're currently only taking 50% bonus, I can change en masse my bonus percentage. I can turn bonus off or on for any fiscal. It will only change assets that do qualify, by the way, because like I said, it is enforced by the IRS tax laws for your tax book. So it's not going to change something that does not qualify. Now, in the case of the qualified improvement property, I've already made that change in mine, but just to show you an example here, I've changed them to non-bonus, straight line, half year, 15 years estimated life, and 20 years for ADS. So here's how you can actually make that change en masse. There's actually a bulk edit tool. So if you've got quite a few of these, you don't have to go into them individually. I've created a group identifying all of my qualified improvement property. So I can simply go to that subset of assets, and I just wanted to make the change for the tax book. And all I did in my particular case here, I changed both the depreciation method, so regardless of what method it was currently in, or I can choose specific methods to change, and I switched them all. Since I opted to do this non-bonus, I swapped them all to straight line half year. I also was able to change those 39-year lives to 15 years. So I can change both depreciation methods and estimated lives, or I can do either or. And it does give you the option of going back to the current depreciation through date, or you can actually wipe out all the depreciation calculated so far and go back to the placed in service date. Now, let's say this was an asset that you may have done some prior adjustment to, which if you notice here, both for tax and for GAAP, I have a beginning date, beginning year to date, and beginning accumulated depreciation calculated. I can tell it to retain that data even if I go back to the placed in service date. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it will do a validation check to make sure you're not trying to make a selection that is not valid under IRS laws. Okay. All right, let's take a quick look at some of the reports that I mentioned that are going to be very important to you that you can generate here. Now, you can generate the actual fileable 4562. It will also generate the attachment that goes along with this. And all the reports in the solution are exportable in multiple formats. So if you look here, you'll see I've got both pages of the actual fileable 4562. Okay. I have the attachment with the details. And again, all of these are exportable to multiple formats. You can push these out to Crystal reports, PDF, Excel data only, CSV file, and so on. And the report I mentioned you can run for reconciling that is going to be that tax expense report that will capture your totals for your 168 and 179. And of course, you can run your sale of property report. Which will break everything down into your correct section property. So your 1245, 1250 property, all of your ordinary gain losses will be on the second page. Because you'll certainly need all of that details. And again, all are exportable. And if you need something like a roll forward report, there's actually a fixed asset summary report. There are also projection reports included as well. I'll go ahead and run this one, as well as things like a standard net book value, depreciation expense, even projection reports. If you need to look at depreciation for future years, if you're involved in the budget and planning process, there's both a monthly projection that will show you future year depreciation for each period during a particular fiscal, or there's another one that will do it for multiple years. But take a look at this fixed asset summary. It's going to capture your beginning cost, acquisitions, transfers in or out, disposals, and your ending costs, of course, as well as total accumulated depreciation. And you will have your totals on the last page. It can be run in subtotals only if you choose to, and you can also sort and subtotal by any of the fields up to 3 layers deep. So if you wanted to do something like location, and below that asset class or GL asset account, you can actually do that. For any of you impacted by Section 199A, there's also a report for that as well. Disposal report is probably another common one that you'll need to be able to generate out of this, because once you, for example, have done your physical inventory and you've now identified, you have, 100 ghost assets, let's say, you can do a proper disposal of those, and you'll certainly need to be able to capture that disposal information on a disposal report. So let's take a look at one here. I'm just going to run this for the past year, back into last year, but you can run this for a month, a quarter, a year, any period you choose. And this can also be sorted in any way you choose. So if you take a look at what gets captured on the disposal report, system number, which is automatically generated by the software for each asset you add. Asset ID, remember, is the one you have full access to. So this would be the number on your asset tag, what it is, in-service date, disposal date, and the solution has the ability to do both full and partial disposals. So under acquired value, when you look at this disposal report, if it's a full disposal, it's going to be the full acquisition value. If it is a partial disposal, it's going to be the disposal amount. So if you take a look at this line 381, you notice I have 2 entries on that same line item. And that's because I dispose of 9,000 in one occasion and 4,500 on another occasion. Going to capture your net proceeds and totals, your realized gain loss and totals, anything that was deferred or not recognized. Now, since I mentioned you can actually do full or partial disposals, let's take a look at an asset that I've done a partial disposal on, the one that I showed you on that report just now. If you notice, there's still 36,500 in value that's continuing to depreciate. You can see I still have more than 13,000 in net book value for tax, more than 21,000 for GAAP. So if you look at the transactions tab, it'll show those 2 partial disposals. In our world, when you do a partial disposal, you're disposing of some portion of the value. It's not looking at quantity. So in this case, you can see I disposed of a $4,500 portion of the whole, and the previous one I disposed of a $9,000 portion of the whole. And all of that information, of course, is captured in the asset tab and the history tab. All right, so let's go back into the reports here. I do want to run the depreciation expense. That's another common one that I do get asked about. And of course, you can run this for multiple books or whichever books you choose and sort and subtotal it in any way. This one will actually show your prior depreciation through date and current through date. So in my case here, my depreciation this run would be looking at 1 month. So let's take a look at that. You'll see here prior through date of June 30th, current through date of July. So my depreciation, this run column, is in fact looking at 1 month's depreciation, and you'll see your totals on the end. All right, let's talk a bit about integration and how you get that information over to the various systems that I talked about. So in the case of Sage 100, if I run depreciation, let's say I'm going to rerun it here for my July. I've run my depreciation, and I need to get that journal entry over to Sage 100. In the case of Sage 100, I don't have to do anything. As soon as I run depreciation here, that information is going to be available to Sage 100, which would be this report. So let's run the report locally so you can see exactly what I'm talking about here. This is going to be the general ledger posting report, which will have all of your depreciation expense, accumulated depreciation, your debits and credits. You can actually run the report manually here, as you can see. You can drill down and see the details. In the case of Sage 100, as soon as I run depreciation, that information is made available. So if I take a look at the Sage 100 link, if I select it, it's going to tell me that Sage 100 will actually pull information. You certainly don't need to do anything from here. Now, with regards to Sage 300, for Sage 300, I would use the posting link that is here. It's going to have me close the company. If I have multiple companies, this is where I'm going to select which company am I doing the posting for and what is my posting period. So in this case, I'm currently depreciated through July 31. So let's change that. And I would simply hit preview. And it's going to show me that very same report and post. And it's going to format this and push this outbound to your Sage 300 installation. In the case of Sage Intact, it's a similar link, but the difference here in Sage Intact is that I need to configure my dimension mapping. So depending on how you're set up, if it's going to be looking for location, let's change these here. And this one will be looking at department, class, and whichever other information is needed. Once I've configured this and save it, I don't have to touch it again. So each period, once I'm going to run my outbound journal entry for Intact, I simply populate my reference number, give it my depreciation through date, preview, and post. Okay, and then it'll be sending that data outbound. So let's go ahead and reopen the company. And let's talk about the asset addition side of things. Now, as I mentioned, inside of Sage 100 or 300, you can tell it to create assets here in the depreciation module. So one of the things I wanted to show you here is how those templates come into play. So if I'm going to add an asset in the solution here, instead of having to manually populate all of this, I would create templates, which is what I mentioned earlier. So I can create templates for whatever type of assets that I want to. And in my template, I can include as much or as little information as I choose. So in this utility trailer template, I simply am including a description, the correct GL account, GL asset, GL accumulated, GL expense account, the asset class. But if you notice, I'm also including property type, depreciation method, and estimated lives for all the books. You can create as many templates as you want to, whatever types of assets you want to, with as much or as little information as you choose. So when I'm creating an asset from an accounts payable transaction in Sage 100 or Sage 300, or even in 500, also you have that ability, I tell it I want to apply a template. That template is going to get the information that's being provided from the ERP side, such as your GL account, but it's going to get things like your asset class, property type, method, and life from here. It's going to get the actual acquisition value for all the books from the ERP side, as well as your acquisition date and in-service date. So when I place an asset in service from that, from the ERP side, it's actually going to be placed in service with everything needed to start depreciation. I don't have to do anything else. Now, I can still tell it to create assets here without using a template. And what's going to happen is going to show up here as what we would call an incomplete asset. So if you do not set up templates, you still can do it. So it'll show up with some of the information. It simply would not have the depreciation information below. So it would show up with property type. It's going to default to personal property. It'll show up with the acquisition date, in-service date, but it'll have and value, but it would have no depreciation method, no estimated life. So you would then need to provide that information here. So my advice is definitely, if you're adding high volumes of assets on a regular basis, definitely take advantage of using those templates. All right, so let me take a quick moment and show you what things looks like from the tracking standpoint versus depreciation. It is really going to look the same, actually uses the same database, but the difference, of course, is going to be no access to those book fields, as I mentioned before. So if I go into a similar asset here, pick on one of these computers, you'll see general information fields. It's going to have the 28 general information fields that you have in the depreciation side, but it gets these additional 12 fields, which you can, of course, rename anything you choose and capture some additional information. But I would recommend being careful to ensure that you're using the fields that are shared between both sides to capture things such as department, where the asset actually is physically, who it's assigned to, and so on, so that if someone is actually doing an inventory here, they can update that information. Now, you can push out multiple inventory lists to multiple users at once, and those users that are actually using an Android app or a scanner do not have to have a license. The person actually using the tracking software is who needs a license. Once an inventory is complete, this is what's going to be important to the accounting team. This report, which is a reconciliation report, I'm just simply going to run this on the last one that I did, because this is a report that's going to identify anything that was not found. So you can see here, assets not found have a status code of N. It's going to give you the tag number and what it is. Of course, the ones found with no changes, the status of O. The one found with changes, the status of C. But this is what's important to the accounting team, because now they can search based on that tag number, do a proper disposal, get it off the book, and stop overpaying on taxes and insurance premium, and really lock down to make sure your inventory is in fact accurate. With regards to the planning module is what handles CIP. So once I've actually completed my spend on any line item within a project, I can easily place it in service. So in my sample project here, you can quickly see my actual spend against both an original and a revised budget. And within each line item here, these are all of my roll-up costs coming from, materials, labor, whatever the case may be. And your sum total of the roll-up costs are what's being measured against your budget for the line item, which of course rolls up to the overall budget of the projects. And to create assets, I simply go up here and say I want to create assets. Anything that I've flagged as spending is complete will show up available to be placed in service. I can simply select all if I'm putting them all in a single company and say create assets. If I'm going to multiple companies, I can simply choose the ones I want with a shift key or control key, choose which company I want to send that to, and create those assets. And of course, I can easily report on what's going on with my spend against budget. I can even run a consolidated report where I'm looking at multiple projects at once, and I can view this information in subtotals or full detail against either sets of numbers, being that original or revised budget. So in a quick look here, just to show you one of the reports that's looking at multiple projects, you'll see here each of my projects, my actual spend, my budget, my actual spend, and you can see here I'm under budget on these two, I'm over budget on this one. But remember, this is the high level view of the overall project, but if I do want to see the details, I can actually drill down here where you can see this line item is 69 grand over, that one's 78.48 over, that one's 45K over. So if you do need to see the details, or you can simply select here, run it in full details, and it'll show all of those projects I selected, where I can see a line item by line item detail level for each project. And of course, all of these are exportable. Now, once I've sent anything to be placed in service in the depreciation module, and again, it does have access to all the templates in the depreciation module, it's easy to find them in the depreciation side. So if you look in the list view here, it's going to create a group with the date and time stamp. If I send one item or 100 items here, they're going to show up in that group that was auto-created. So I can simply go in and look. If I did tell it to use a template, you'll see that in addition to the acquisition date, place in service date, and value it got from the planning module, it'll also have depreciation method and estimated life. You don't have to touch it. Nothing else is needed. It's ready to start depreciating. If I send something over without using a template, it'll simply have the acquisition date, in-service date, and value, and any other information you may have mapped from the fields in the planning module will show up here as well. So it does integrate pretty well and helps you get through that process pretty efficiently. So let's go back here and take a look if there's any questions from anyone in the chat.
Absolutely. First of all, Wayne, thank you so much for that very thorough overview and showing us, from stage 100 to 300 to intact. That was great. We have some great questions already. A couple here from Don. The first question he asked was, does Sage Fixed Assets take into consideration new accounting for leases procurements? So, for example, a company can purchase a production-related fixed asset that is reserved for a particular client's produce runs, which now would fall under a new lease procurement. Does that make sense to you?
Okay, I think it does.
With impact. I'm sorry, I could clarify that too. Speaking specifically about Sage Intact.
Oh, okay. Now, it depends on how, what type of lease it is as to whether or not you can really track that on the Sage Fixed Asset depreciation side, right? Now, if it's a finance type lease where you're just going to do straight line amortization, that can be handled in the depreciation module in Sage Fixed Assets. Now, if it's something that's tied to the new accounting standard where you're looking at operating leases where you need to calculate right of use or interest and things like that, it does not handle that. But I do have information on other sources that I can provide through Kelly. But if I'm not answering that clearly enough, definitely let Kelly know and she can set up a call with us so we can discuss a bit further. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, if this is also from a lease standpoint, that it's something that you need to bring in and treat it as if it's going to be in CIP for some period of time and place in service later, again, using straight line amortization, you can absolutely do that as well. Okay.
Got it. Thank you. And there was a follow-up question here. Don is also asking if he can run basic fixed assets reports directly out of Intact, or does he have to have fixed assets up and running in order to do reporting? Does that make sense too? I want to make sure I'm answering questions.
It's a separate installation than Intact or 100. Remember, this is its own standalone solution that does integrate in various ways with these. In the case of Sage Intact, it'll post your journal entry outbound to a file for Intact to import. Now, let's say you're a person that has a large number of assets. You're doing a lot of AP or PO transactions in Intact, and you have a lot of assets to create. There is an option out there currently where if you can do an export out from Intact and push that out to an Excel file, for example, there's an import wizard in the fixed asset solution that can be used for importing from Excel. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. I see you are referencing, though, with regards to that, it is tied to the new lease accounting rules. So our software does not handle that, but I do have information in one of our partners that actually integrates with Intact, and I'll get that information through Kelly out to you. So Kelly, if you do me a favor and capture Donald Carroll's info, we will actually do that. I'll get that info out to you.
Got it. Okay, I'll do that. And Don, please just stand by and we'll get back to you on that, in just a little while here. Thank you for that, Wayne. We have a couple other questions too.
Sure.
Let's see. There was a question around deployment. Is this a cloud application or is it an on-premise?
It is an on-premise solution, but it can also be hosted. So if you are currently using a hosting provider where you have your applications hosted off-site, certainly, you can investigate if they would be able to host it for you. Now, we have hosting partners that we work with, and I'm sure as well Kelly might be able to point you in some direction, but we do have certified hosting providers that we work with. It does support terminal services, remote desktop, things like that as well.
Excellent. And we actually, BrainSell provides our own hosting services also. So just something
there
to
you
keep
go.
in mind there. Yeah.
So
many
choices,
Yeah, exactly.
which is even better because they can actually then help you with any needs you have since they do have a hosting environment. I just wanted it to be clear that Sage ourselves do not host this particular application.
Right. Got it. All right, just a couple more questions here. There's another one, and we kind of touched on it before, but just to reiterate, the question was, does this only integrate with Sage accounting software? I can answer that question. It's product agnostic, basically. So fixed assets can work for you regardless of the accounting software that you're using. But Wayne, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Sure. As I mentioned that, with customization, we do have folks that are using, other non-Sage ERPs, such as, Oracle, SAP, or something else like that. But we can integrate with some customization to non-Sage accounting software. But we do integrate with all of ours. So, if you do have some users here with X3, by the way, the X3 integration piece is managed by the X3 team. So if you are an X3 user and you need some information on that, just let Kelly know, and she can get you some information from the X3 team.
And it looks like we've got one last question here. Are all modules included, or can I just pick and choose the modules that I want or need at the time?
Oh, sure. You can choose an individual modules. For example, the heart of the solution is the depreciation module. So there are many customers who will opt to go with just taking on depreciation initially. And then at some point later, they may come back and say, hey, we're having a lot of projects. We need to get the planning module for handling CIP. Or maybe we're not doing a good job of trying to do physical inventories from an Excel spreadsheet. We need a real solution, and then they'll come back and add the tracking modules. But there are cost savings when you bundle things together, by the way. So if you do what they call a track pack, you can get depreciation and tracking, or a project pack where you can do depreciation and planning, or you can get the entire bundle. But definitely reach out to Kelly if you do have a need for a particular module initially, and then you can weigh the cost difference of bundling it together versus waiting, 6 months or a year to add the other module at some point.
Perfect. All right, I think that does it for the questions. Of course, if you think of any others, reach out to me directly. In the next couple of slides, our contact information will be up for you to take down. But I think that's it for the questions for now, so we can go on to promotion. So we are offering, for those of you who have joined us today, 10% off of perpetual licenses within this month. So before the end of September, for Sage Fixed Assets, we're offering 10% off perpetual licenses. And just so you know, perpetual licenses are a one-time purchase. You own the software, and then, of course, there is an annual maintenance and support renewal that provides you with access to the upgraded versions, as well as any fixes should there be a bug or some kind of glitch. Sage will continue to provide a fix for those issues, though I will say they are not common. And so, yeah, 10% off. It's a great offer, and like I said, before the end of September. And finally, just want to thank everybody once again for joining us today. Like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. If you want a more in-depth one-on-one demo, that is also something that we'd be more than happy to set up with you. And yeah, just feel free to reach out. We will, of course, be sending a recording of this to everybody in a follow-up email tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank you all once again. Wayne, thank you so much for everything today. Really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and a wonderful long weekend coming up.